Reid Blackman is the author of Ethical Machines, and he's a founder and CEO of Virtue, which is an AI ethical risk consultancy. You can find him on X at Reid Blackman, and he joins us here on a regular basis to discuss issues around AI. So, Reid, look, this is pretty... You know, a lot of people are pointing out today, first of all, the internet in itself, funded by a DARPA grant, created... always been tied up in the Defense Department and to some extent the intelligence agencies. So the independence of the internet at large and anybody that, by the way, I think Google was funded by a grant as well from some of these agencies, at least in part, you know, which kind of makes you go, well, how independent are these organizations and this entire framework? How independent is it when we're trying to establish, you know, some framework, some ground of free speech? And then here we go. You know, with AI, what do you make of this story from this congressional report on the National Science Foundation?
Yeah, so the allegation is something like this, from what I gather. I mean, it's a very long, dense report, but the short of it is something like this. The government is funding various companies that will play a role in ferreting out and ultimately blocking misinformation on social media platforms. The concern, of course, is that government playing a role in potential censorship of views that, of course, the government shouldn't censor because we live in a free society, we have a right to free speech. And so the government shouldn't play a role in doing that sort of thing. So obviously the major issue is government overreach, government surveillance, and government curtailing of free speech. That's the concern.
Yeah.
Now, of course, yeah.
It's legitimate, though, Reid. Like, look, we know through the Twitter files reporting from guys like Matt Taibbi, the role that our intelligence agencies were playing behind the scenes, FBI, at a minimum the FBI, in helping craft policies with the tech companies when they were cracking down on free speech. So, I mean, it's not even a concern. It's like it's a reality that we have to come to grips with, that the government is looking to backdoor censor free speech through private companies. And at this point, I think we need to be concerned about also, you know, positive propaganda-based thought originations, not just shutting down speech, but manipulating speech through the use of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so, I mean, I wonder how much, though, you disagree with what's being done in principle as opposed to in practice. So you might think in principle it's a good idea, but in practice, when the government gets involved, things go haywire because people want to stay in power. As you said earlier, they want to have control, again, so that they can stay in power. But I wonder how much you disagree with in principle. I mean, suppose, for instance, all the way. So I mean, I'm of the view, if let's say China is creating disinformation, right? That it's plainly false. Let's just assume we know it's false. And they're putting it on social media. They're using AI in various ways to amplify that message. And the message is one that would subvert the integrity of our elections. I'm of the view that we should stop that sort of thing. That seems like a bad thing. And then I think, well, who's going to stop that sort of thing? And I think in principle, our government is supposed to save us from external threats. And that seems like a legitimate external threat.
I'm going to back into your hypothetical. Okay, Reid?
Yeah.
So first of all, in principle, I am pretty closely affiliated to a free speech absolutist. Like, my principle is there is no practical way to implement a virtuous speech censorship. A, who defines what is misinformation? B, who's the gatekeeper that watches and monitors and selects universal enforcement instead of selective enforcement of whatever is misinformation? See, these are all elusive things. You can't define misinformation. You can't find the trusted gatekeeper who won't shut down people they disagree with or selectively censor. So I'm an absolutist pretty much on that. Now we can push issues like, you know, child pornography or whatever. Sure. We're all going to get to, there needs to be some censorship. But the idea is that the First Amendment is a pretty much absolutist principle, and we start from that. Now you changed, and that, by the way, these are rights that are availed to American citizens. You changed it when you said Chinese. Let's say the Chinese. And look, let's be more on the nose with it. Like Russia, everybody says Russia. That's the use. That's the excuse for censorship. Well, my argument is, Russia and China don't have any free speech rights in America. There's no First Amendment right for any citizens or governments in other countries. But the issue is, Reid, when they start saying, oh, you're a tool of Putin, or you're echoing misinformation, an American citizen now, right?
Yeah.
And now we're back to the principle. Hey, American citizen, pretty much free speech.
Okay, so there's a couple things to say here. So number one is there's an extent to which I agree with you about some issues. So one thing that the report mentions, and I don't know that this is true, but one thing the report mentions is looking for instance, anti-Black messages on social media. That strikes me as too far. Too much gets characterized as anti-Black or racist. And there's, I think, a concern that, let's say, saying affirmative action shouldn't exist counts as anti-Black. That's not a world that I think that we want to live in. So I think that in many ways, or at least in some ways, you and I are on the same page.
Well, I'd go one step further real quick, Reid. I'd go one step further. Racism. Openly racist stuff is not, it's still protected speech because it's free speech.
Agreed.
Go ahead.
Yes, agreed. I think we're on the same page with regards to that. So I think that sort of thing is very potentially overreach. Now, 2 points. Number one, we're talking about social media, not the government. Social media is a business, and they have control over their business, as I think more or less they ought to, unless something deeply illegal is going on. And then you don't have a right to post on Facebook, as far as I know. You don't have a constitutional right to post on Twitter. That's one thing to say. And the second thing to say is you certainly don't have a right, even if you have a right to post, you don't have a right to have your voice amplified, right? So there's always, and maybe people don't understand the extent to which this is happening, but every social media platform from X or Twitter to Facebook and Instagram to TikTok, it's curated, right? You don't get to see all the stuff. You get to see the things that the AI algorithms that those companies developed want to show you for whatever reason, probably to maximize your engagement with the platform. Now, that means it's going to amplify some messages and it's not going to amplify others. You don't have a right to be amplified, right? Sometimes I post on social media and it explodes. Sometimes I post on social media and it falls completely flat. And I don't know why the algorithm is doing something, but there's an act of curation that all of these social media companies are doing. And there is no right for them to curate in a way that amplifies your voice or my voice or any particular individual's voice. It's up to them.
So here's my response to that. You're 100% right. So, for example, during the Colin Kaepernick, kneeling during the national anthem thing, one of the points I made is, look, when you're an employee of a business, you don't have full free speech rights in the course of your job for that business. Like a grocery checkout teller can't wear a Make America Great Again hat if the grocery store doesn't want you wearing a Make America Great Again hat while you're working the teller. And an NFL player doesn't have a right to kneel during the national anthem if the NFL doesn't want you kneeling during the national anthem. Just because you have free speech doesn't mean you get to do it on someone else's dime on their platform. And so you're right. To the extent, and that's the key here, these companies are private, they can make their own policies. The two responses to that would be, one, the Twitter files were so valuable for us, and Elon Musk has been so valuable in exposing the way their internal biases, right? And by the way, Google's Gemini AI generation, image generation, did it itself because it was so absurd, right? And so everybody's like, whoa, look at Google, like, wow. And if they're doing that with images, if they're doing it with images, they're doing it with search results as well. So that should have some consumer effect. Knowledge helps the consumer. Like, and by the way, I think Google has 96% of search traffic. Like, they dominate. So. But we should know these things as consumers. We should know that Facebook is doing this. But the second point is, how truly private are they? And that takes us back to this AI thing that we're talking about, Reid. Like, if the government's in the background doing this, how truly private are you? Okay,
so, look, I agree that...
By the way, I think I'm totally distracted. No one watching can see this, but I have a window up. I can see Reid, and there's another window up the producers have on my feed. Am I watching Sean Duffy in a tank top, done with his hit on the Will Cain Show? Is that what I'm seeing?
I don't know if the guys Sean Duffy in his tank top.
Control me can tell me. Somebody in a tank top.
Yes,
Go ahead, Reid.
it actually
Go ahead on how truly.
It actually is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because I had the same return feed up for him during his interview before. I should probably turn that off, but yeah.
I see Sean in a tank top as I'm listening to Reid try to very seriously tell me about AI and whether or not it's got government.
I could do it in a tank top if you prefer. That's fine. I like a tank top.
All right, please address my point, though, Reid.
Let's see the point. Well, so one thing that you said that's interesting is that you want consumers to be aware of what what kind of curation they're engaged in. What kind of curation is Facebook or X engaged in? That's only going to happen through regulations that require a certain level of transparency, right? So that's one thing. That sounds like an argument in favor of a certain kind of regulation, or at least one regulation, which I'm sort of fine with, and that's what some regulations coming down the pike are asking for. But it's a regulatory requirement. The other thing, I don't know. Look, the other thing that you said was, is it really private?
How
I think
truly
the short
private?
answer is yes. I mean, we see right now the government going after big tech, trying to break them up as monopolies. So there's clearly an antagonistic relationship. In all cases, like sometimes something gets funded and you raise an eyebrow and you think, if it's funded by them, that's really suspicious. And sometimes the funding is really independent. There's no strings attached. Sometimes there's strings attached. Sometimes there's not. And then we just get into this sort of investigative journalistic question: to what extent is government pulling the strings of, say, a Facebook or an Instagram? I'm not inclined to conceive of Zuckerberg or Musk as marionettes, so I'm inclined to think they pretty much do what they want. But I could turn out to be wrong about that. Maybe there's sticks and carrots that the government is using on them that we're not aware of. I just don't know the answer.
And by the way, I'm playing this forward because we're talking about AI, like how much is government going to have its fingers in? Because I think like the internet is one thing when you have a wild, wild west and they're trying to tamp it down, like censor.
Yeah.
Then the next step though is, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but like mind control. Like AI has the potential to reshape our forward-thinking vision of reality. You know what I mean? Tell us something that is not. And the government's hands in that is pretty terrifying. In fact, let's
anyone's
switch to
hand in
this.
that is terrifying, right? Anyone's hand.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Well,
and so then the question is,
fair.
how do we stop anyone's hand from doing that sort of thing, from being manipulative or misleading in that kind of way?
Well, you don't. And that's where you and I might differ. I'm more concerned about the government attempting to manipulate my mind than a random collection of memers on the internet. And I know I'm being a little bit dismissive. I know I'm being dismissive because there can be nefarious actors as well, and foreign powers. Your point on foreign powers is well taken. But I just would rather have the wild, wild west full of misinformation, the democratization of information, because then the truth can poke through. You might have to fight for it. You might have to work for it, but it's there. But if the government's the one controlling it, the truth doesn't even get to poke through the clouds.
Yeah, I guess I think that there's lots of powers at play. The government is one of them. And look, I'll say something really stupid and obvious. I don't want bad regulation. No, I want good regulation. Now, there's a claim, and I take it that this is the one that you're making, is that there is no good regulation to be had where government plays some role in tamping down misinformation, because it's necessarily going to be censorship, government overreach, government surveillance of its own citizens in an objectionable way. And I guess I just don't know the answer. I want to hear some proposals on the table of what would decent regulation look like where government plays some role in tamping down misinformation. I'm more optimistic than you, which is a low bar, but I think there's got to be something. Let me make one more comparison. I don't know anything about predatory lending by credit cards. I just don't know. I don't know about it. I know that they engage in it, but there are regulations to protect me. So thankfully, I don't have to go learn about how credit card companies operate in ways that might be predatory, in ways that I might be victim to. The government has taken it off my shoulders to have that kind of fear and concern and burden of figuring all that stuff out. And I'm grateful for that, because I'm just not interested. I don't want to read terms and conditions of credit card companies and that sort of thing. I'm inclined to think, and I could be dissuaded, but I'm inclined to think that the burden of figuring out what's true and what's not in a phenomenally polluted environment is too high of a burden to place on the average citizen. Now, maybe that turns out to be true, maybe that turns out to be wrong, but I have very little faith in the average person to find that truth poking through. And I think they need some kind of help, especially when there are actors who are actively working to undermine the average citizen's ability to find that truth poking through.
So, this is we'll end on this, Reid. So, I'm going to be real with you. I go back and forth. Look, first of all, I'm different than you. I have much more faith in the average person.
Yeah.
what did I see the other day? It was that documentary from Netflix with that Indian dude. Was it called Wild Wild West or something like that?
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
he had
sure,
kind of like a cult
He starts a
in
cult, something
California.
like that.
Yeah, and they had some quote, and this could have been AI, and then he was saying that the average person is an idiot. It's government by an idiot for an idiot, and so, and everybody's laughing, and they're the thing about having faith in the average person is this: you don't have to have faith that everyone out there is a genius and willing to put in the work to find the truth. You don't have to have that faith, but you have to look at the alternative. And I have no faith in our government overlords' willingness to faithfully pursue the truth. That's what I would say. William F. Buckley once famously said he'd rather be governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston phone book than the faculty of Harvard. Yeah. And there's no doubt that the faculty of Harvard is, quote unquote, smarter than the first 2,000 names in the Boston phone book, right?
Sure.
But smart does not equal wisdom. Those are two different things. Sure. And while I don't think I have to have complete faith in the average person to always do the work and always find the truth, but it exceeds the bar of the elites, the faith I have in the elites to actually care about the truth.
Yeah. So let me say one last thing on this. So I don't think that my claim is that people are idiots. I think my claim is that there are people looking to actively undermine the average person's exercising of their intellectual capacities. Right? So they've got whatever intellectual capacities they do. I generally think, right, you've got everything from Breitbart to New York Times and everything between, and the average citizen has to sort of work it out. What concerns me is actors potentially using AI to undermine people's ability to exercise their intellectual capacities in the appropriate way. And I think that we could, and I think we agree on that front, especially on the foreign political actors front. Well, and then I think the government's role is to protect us from those acts of, if you like, intellectual aggression.
Well, they're protecting us from ourselves under the banner of saving democracy. That's what's happened, though. They use, we know, for example, that our intelligence services have interfered in foreign elections under the banner of saving democracy. Can't let these communists win an election in Italy. We're gonna help spin this election so that it wins for democracy. What we didn't really ever anticipate was them turning it back on America under the banner of saving democracy.
Look, at the end of the day, you and I might be pretty close together. We might be a little bit far apart on principle, but we might be very close together in practice. Insofar as, I think you attribute it in many cases to them desiring more and more power. I always like to say, a lot of times it's just incompetence. Like, it's a hard problem. Even if you
both
are of goodwill, right? It's both, right? But even if you are, most people in our government can't spell AI, let alone wield it in an effective manner. And so between government overreach, general incompetence, I think that there's a lot of reason to push back against it. So to that extent, I think we're on the same page.
I don't think we're in the sweet spot yet, but we'll end it here. I think AI right now is actually in a pretty good spot. I think it will get a little better. I like that there is Grok and Chat GPT and there's like however many, and there's no dominant player. I guess Chat GPT is the leader, but I don't think they've won, and with so many different ones, competitors and democratization, there's no capture of AI, but I'm worried we're headed there. Just like Google captured search.
Sounds like you're fighting for DEI for AI.
Get out of here. I'm fighting for anti-monopolistic end results when it comes to AI that are easily manipulated or captured by government players or anybody nefarious. We don't need one dominant monopolistic player.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the government is pushing back quite a bit in a bipartisan way against tech monopolies, right? So I think her name is Lena. I think Lena Khan, is pushing back she's pushing antitrust laws against the big tech companies. So there has been recently pushback against, say, Apple and the way that they operate. They just actually received a $2 billion fine or a $5 billion fine? Was it yesterday by the European Union for monopolistic practices? So for what it's worth, I agree with you that, let 1,000 AI flowers bloom. That's better than it's being centralized and controlled by one entity. And there's reason for hope on that front because, among other things, just natural competitiveness of the market. We also have government pushing against monopolistic tech.
And by the way, one of those 1,000 flowers can be your DEI AI if you want.
No,
Call it
I'm
Gemini,
not.
in
That's
fact,
not.
and have it owned by Google. We already have that DEI AI. It's owned by Google. All right. Ethical Machines. Check it out. Founder and CEO of Virtue, Reid Blackman. Great discussion. Thanks, Reid.
Yeah, always a pleasure, man.